I am God, and I see her now. The girl. She is sitting in a corner, knees pulled tight to her chest, tears falling quietly onto the floor. Her room is dark, but not only because the lights are off, it is dark because despair has thickened the air like smoke. She thinks no one sees her. She believes no one cares. She whispers into the shadows, "Why am I even here?" But I hear every word. I feel every ache. And as she weeps into her pillow, the enemy circles around her like a vulture proud of the chains he has wrapped around her fragile heart. What he does not know is this: I am watching. I am closer than her breath, and the enemy is about to tremble before my light. Her story began long before this night of tears. From the moment she was conceived, she was marked by rejection. Her mother was afraid, unsure she could handle another child, and she thought of ways to end the pregnancy. But I protected this little one because I had already written her name into the palm of my hand. She would not be erased. She would not be forgotten. Even when she was born into a household torn by anger and poverty, I whispered over her, "You are mine." Yet she did not hear me. Instead, she heard shouting. She saw her father's rage boil over in drunken nights, fists slamming against the walls, her mother crying silently in the kitchen. At 5 years old, she learned to hide behind the couch when voices rose. At 7, she learned what it felt like to go to bed hungry. At 9, she learned that adults sometimes make promises they never keep. By the time she was 12, she had already been carrying wounds that most never speak of. At school, other children laughed at her worn-out clothes. At home, she was told she was too much trouble. She began to believe the lie: I am unwanted. I am unloved. I watched her whisper those words to herself in the dark. And though she could not see me, I wept with her. Every tear was counted, every sigh recorded in the book of her life. When she entered her teenage years, the darkness thickened. Her siblings found escape, some through relationships, some by leaving the house altogether. But she remained, alone, isolated, and rebellion began to stir in her heart. She spoke back. She fought against the weight pressing down on her. She did not realize that the pain of abandonment had already carved deep scars. I saw her on the nights when she would stare at the ceiling, thinking of ways to disappear. She did not know how to ask for help. She did not know what help even meant. No one had ever taught her the language of hope, and so she tried to bury her cries. She laughed louder at school, but her laughter was thin, hollow. She dressed boldly to hide the smallness she felt inside. There were moments, brief ones, when my voice broke through the static. A neighbor would smile at her and say, "God bless you." A song would play on the radio about love she could not explain. In those fleeting seconds, her heart would pause, almost listen. But then the noise of her world drowned me out again. And so she kept sinking. At 15, she found herself drawn to friends who carried their own brokenness. They introduced her to things she did not understand: candles lit in back rooms, whispers of spells, charms hung around necks for protection. They told her it was harmless. Another tradition. Another way to belong. She wanted so desperately to belong that she agreed. She stood in circles where shadows pressed close, and she thought she was safe. But I saw what she could not see. I saw the spirits of deception swirling, eager to wrap tighter chains around her. I saw her innocence mocked by darkness, and I ached. Still, I did not look away. Because even as she stumbled deeper into the valley, I knew this: her cry, though muffled, was reaching me. Her heart was bruised, but not beyond repair. Her soul was pressed, but not destroyed. One night, after another fight in her home, she ran outside barefoot, the cold pavement stinging her feet. She sat on the curb, arms shaking, whispering to the wind, "I don't want to live like this. I don't want to feel like this." That whisper was enough. A single crack in the wall. And through that crack, my light was already pressing in. She could not see it yet. She thought she was still utterly alone. She thought her future was only more nights of tears, more shadows surrounding her. But I was already moving. I was already setting the stage. She belonged to me, and the enemy knew it. That is why he fought so hard. That is why the oppression grew heavier. That is why the shadows grew darker. Because deep down, even hell itself recognized the girl crying in the dark was a daughter destined for light. I leaned close that night, closer than her breath, and I whispered words she did not yet understand. "You will not be lost forever. You are mine, and soon the enemy will tremble." Morning came like a dull blade, scraping light across her blinds. She dressed without thinking, tugging a hoodie over yesterday's shirt covering the bruised feelings she had no words for. In the kitchen, a pot banged, someone muttered, someone else slammed a door. The radio spoke of weather and traffic and then went silent between stations. In that quiet, I whispered, "You are seen," but the noise inside her heart was louder. At school, she kept her eyes down. Lockers clanged, perfume hung sweet and heavy, and laughter broke in sharp shards that found their way beneath her skin. A girl with glittered nails hooked an arm through hers. "You're coming over tonight," the girl said. "My aunt reads cards. She knows things." The invitation sounded like belonging, and belonging sounded like oxygen. "Sure," she said, and smiled as if the word cost her nothing. Evenings smelled of incense. The small apartment held bowls of salt strings of beads candles that burned low and blue. The aunt's bracelets chimed as she shuffled cards with practiced ease. "Relax," she said. "This is only light. Your guides want to help." The girl sat on a cushion and tried to still the flutter in her ribs. I sent a memory her neighbor humming a Christmas hymn she barely remembered, but the aunt spread the deck like a fan. "Choose." Her fingers hovered. A friend whispered, "It's fine. Everybody does it." She picked 3 cards, laid them down, and watched the aunt's eyes narrow. The woman said. "You've been followed since birth. Strong spirit, but you need protection." A red thread appeared tied around the girl's wrist with a knot and a smile. "Now you're safe." She thanked her, though she felt smaller leaving than when she arrived. Night after night, the circle expanded. A charm on a chain, a candle for luck. Words repeated without knowing what they meant. She told herself it was harmless, that it kept bad dreams away, that it gave her power in a world where she had none. Yet the dreams darkened. She woke at 3 a.m., breath-caught body heavy a shadow at the edge of the room, like a coat on a hook that moved when air did not move. "It's just stress," she told herself. I stood beside her bed and spoke her name. She rolled over and let the shadow stay. Friends came and went. One boy with 2 old eyes took her hand at a bus stop and said, "You don't have to be scared when you're with me." She wanted to believe him. He smelled of smoke and mint gum. Danger looked like safety when safety had never lasted. He laughed at prayer and raised a glass to fate. "The universe listens if you talk the right way," he said, tapping the crystal around her neck. "See, you're learning." She nodded, the crystal cool against skin that warmed with shame. I sent messengers. A cafeteria worker with wrists like tree roots slid her an extra carton of milk and said, "God loves you, sweetheart." A PE teacher paused in the doorway. "You're fast," he said. "Don't waste it." A neighbor placed a casserole on the stoop with a note, "I am praying." The girl held the note over the trash, then tucked it under her pillow for reasons she could not explain. Angels stood at the corners of rooms the girl thought were empty. They watched knives fall harmlessly from counters, steered cars 1 inch wider at intersections, and pressed peace over her when nightmares pressed panic. Demons circled too promising shortcuts and numbness, bargaining in the currency of the human ache. "Just a little more," they hissed. "Then you'll feel nothing." I limited their reach. I never surrendered my claim. On a Saturday, the card-reading aunt hosted a larger gathering. Music, low lights, lower mirrors draped in gauze. "We will cleanse the house," the aunt announced, "and cleanse each other." A bundle of smoking herbs passed hand to hand. The girl coughed, eyes watering. "You look pale," someone said. She whispered, "I'm fine." I said, "You are mine," and she shivered without knowing why. They drew a salt circle on the floor. "Step inside," the aunt said, "and speak what you desire." Desire climbed the girl's throat and turned to gravel. She wanted a home that didn't break, a mother who didn't cry, nights that didn't echo. She said instead, "Protection." The aunt nodded, satisfied, and chanted words that tasted of dust. In the soundless place beyond, sound hell took notes and plotted chains. In the courts of heaven, I wrote another line in the story, "Not for long." Afterward, the boy with 2 old eyes walked her to the bus. "You okay?" he asked, lighting another cigarette. She lied. "Yeah." He exhaled, smoke rings that collapsed as quickly as promises. "You should move in with me," he said. "Get away from all that drama." His apartment had a sagging couch and curtains that didn't quite close, but it also had quiet, and quiet felt like mercy. She went. The first week she slept. No doors slamming, no footsteps pacing the hall. She cooked noodles and watched shows where families sat at tables and passed bread without shouting. She pretended the glow of the screen could warm her. The second week, the boy stayed out late. When he came back, he smelled of another person's perfume and said, "Don't start." The third week, a bruise bloomed on her arm, where his hand had landed when she asked a second question. She learned to fold laundry silently. Shame told her the bruise was her fault. Fear told her to stay because the alternative was worse. Pride told her she could manage it if she performed perfectly. I told her, "Call on me," and the words hovered like birds afraid to land. One night she found a thin paperback in a free box outside a laundromat. The cover was bent, the spine cracked, the Gospel of John. She slid it into her tote and read a page on the bus. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God," and felt something loosen in the knot around her wrist. She snapped the book closed and looked out the window so no one would see her eyes shine. The aunt called, "We're meeting again. Bring the girl, she has promise." The boy said, "You should go. We need good energy." She went wearing a sweater to hide new bruises. The room smelled of vinegar and roses. A mirror leaned against the wall, black cloth, half fallen. The aunt lifted a bowl. "We will invite guides," she said, "and seal your gifts." The girl's hands prickled. I surrounded her with patience. I will not violate the freedom I gave, but I will surround it with opportunities to be free. They pricked her finger. A drop of blood fallen. The aunt smiled and touched it to the rim of the bowl. The girl's stomach turned. "Is this necessary?" she asked. The room went quiet enough to hear the candle crackle. "Necessary for power," the aunt said. The boy rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic," the girl whispered. "I just want to feel safe." The aunt's smile did not reach her eyes. "Then do not question." A cold draft moved across the floor, though no window was open. The flame bent as if to bow. In that moment, I sent a memory so bright it cut like glass, a little version of her, holding a neighbor's hand at a Christmas service, singing Silent Night off key, feeling warmth she could not name. Her shoulders sagged. Tears rose hot. She wiped them away before they could fall. On the walk home, she lagged behind the boy. The city hissed with tires on wet pavement. A bus splashed past. A neon cross flickered over a storefront church. Through the open door spilled a sound unlike the gatherings she knew, unrehearsed, not polished but honest. A woman sang "Waymaker, Miracle Worker," and voices joined, cracked and true. The boy tugged her wrist. "Come on." She looked back at the doorway and felt a pressure in her chest like a hand opening. "Maybe another time," she said to herself. That night the shadow returned heavier than before. Sleep pinned her, breath thinned. The room seemed to lean. She tried to lift her hands and found them lead. A hiss crawled the walls, worthless, alone ours. In her mind, faint, almost foolish, rose a word she'd seen in the free book, Jesus. She thought it did not speak it, and the weight eased like a door unlatched. She fell asleep with the book against her ribs. By morning, she told herself it was only exhaustion. She tied back her hair and made coffee that tasted burnt and brave. The boy muttered, "We're out of cash." She nodded, already calculating extra shifts. As she rinsed the cup, the red thread caught on a nail and snapped the knot, sliding into the sink. She stared at the loose strand and felt panic rise and then, unexpectedly, relief. She does not know it yet, but her cry has already reached my throne. The chains that promise protection are beginning to slacken. Darkness thinks it has claimed her. It has only marked the place where my light will strike. She thought the broken thread was only an accident, but in the unseen realm it was the sound of walls beginning to crack. Yet for now the girl still walked in shadow. The enemy whispered louder, and her steps followed paths that seemed easier in the moment, though each one pulled her further away from peace. The boy she trusted became the center of her world. He knew her fears, knew the story of her home, and used both like tools. "You'd be nothing without me," he said one night when her eyes wandered toward the glowing cross she had seen again on the bus ride home. She wanted to argue, but silence felt safer, so she let his words sink like stones into her heart. The apartment grew thick with arguments, curses slung like daggers, promises, broken as quickly as they were made. To dull the sting, she began reaching for bottles. What started as a sip at parties turned into gulps alone on the couch. The taste was bitter, but the numbness was sweeter than silence. The boy brought her pills to relax. She swallowed them without asking. I saw her on the nights when she stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the wall, tears mixing with the sting of alcohol in her throat. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." I whispered back, "You are mine," but she could not hear through the noise. The enemy's laughter grew bold. He painted lies on her mind. "You are ruined. You are beyond saving. You are no different than your father. No one will ever love you." She believed him because lies repeated in darkness often feel like truth. She began avoiding the friends who still carried even a hint of light. She stopped answering her mother's calls. She let the free Bible gather dust beneath a pile of magazines. One night, after a fight that left her wrist bruised and her spirit shattered, she ran again, this time not to the curb of her childhood street, but to the city's edge. A bridge arched above rushing water, the kind of place where sirens often wailed. She gripped the rail, knuckles white, and thought this could end it all. I leaned close. My angels surrounded her. A car slowed, the driver rolling down the window. "Are you okay?" Startled, she stepped back. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. But the whisper she tried to silence grew louder inside. What if this is the only way out? She walked home, but hope shrank thinner each day. Darkness seemed to stalk her. Shadows moved in corners where no one stood. She woke with scratches on her arms she could not explain. The boy laughed. "You're losing it." He didn't know the battle raging around her, the clash of demons and angels, the tug of war over her soul. In the midst of it, I kept planting seeds. She passed a street preacher one evening. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Jesus sees you, even in the darkest night." She scoffed and quickened her pace, but her chest tightened as though those words had been aimed straight at her. At work, a coworker slipped her a sticky note with a scribbled verse. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." She crumpled it quickly, embarrassed. But later in the break room, she smoothed it out and stared at the words. The boy found the note and sneered. "Don't tell me you're becoming one of those church people." She stuffed it in her pocket and said nothing. Weeks bled into months. She sank deeper. Nights of numbness gave way to mornings of sickness. The charm necklaces multiplied. The candles burned lower. The apartment walls seemed to lean in closer, tighter. Then came the night of the dream. She was standing in a field, the sky bruised, purple winds whipping hard. She saw shadows, tall, faceless figures stretching toward her, their arms twisting like smoke. She tried to run, but her feet sank in mud. Just as the shadows closed and a voice thundered, "Enough." Light split the sky so bright it seared her eyes. The figures shrieked and dissolved. She woke with her heart pounding, drenched in sweat. For the first time in years, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt awe. She sat on the edge of her bed whispering, "What was that? Who was that?" And though she did not realize it yet, she had spoken her first prayer in a very long time. The enemy sensed it and his fury grew. The very next day, the boy accused her of betrayal, throwing words like knives. "You're weak. You're nothing. You'll never survive without me." Her silence broke. She screamed back, the sound echoing through the thin walls of the apartment. For the first time, she began to doubt him. For the first time, she began to think, maybe this isn't all there is. Maybe there's something more. And I whispered again, "Yes, there is. And soon you will see my light." I do not shout when a whisper will save. I do not break the bruised reed. I breathe on it until it sings. After the dream split her night and awe settled like dew, I arranged small mercies where her feet would land ordinary doorways into extraordinary grace. On Monday, the bus lurched and a seat opened beside a woman with silver hair and kind hands. The woman folded a paper and smiled without staring. "Rough morning?" she asked. The girl shrugged. "Something like that." The woman nodded toward the book peeking from the tote, its plastic library cover still clouded with scuffs. The Gospel of John. "That one changes people," she said almost to herself. "It changed me." The girl looked down, traced the cracked spine with a thumbnail. She wanted to ask how. She wanted to say, "Last night I dreamed of a voice that ended a storm." Instead, she said, "I'm just looking." The woman's eyes warmed. "He's very good at being found." At work, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the coffee tasted burnt but brave, the way survival often does. A co-worker named Ruth, who wore comfortable shoes and carried a thermos that smelled like cinnamon, set a paper cup by her register. Extra, Ruth said. And hey, some folks from my church are getting together Wednesday night. Nothing fancy, just soup and songs. You should come. The girl opened her mouth to decline out of habit, then closed it. Maybe, she said, and surprised herself by meaning it. That night, the boy barked about bills about the sink, about a text he swore was nothing. She folded laundry with quiet hands. When he slammed the door and the apartment rattled, she took the thin free book from beneath the magazines and sat on the floor where the light from the hall pooled like a small lake. She read aloud in a whisper, halting and slow. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The words were not a spell, they were a key. Something clicked inside a locked place. I drew near, not with spectacle, but with presence like warmth drifting through a winter crack. She exhaled for the first time all day and did not notice that the clock's red digits crept past midnight without the old panic rising in her throat. On Wednesday, she almost talked herself out of going. Rain ticked at the window. The boy texted late. The bus app said delayed, but Ruth's message blinked. Still on for soup? I'll save you a chair. The girl tucked the book into her tote, wrapped a scarf twice around her neck, and stepped into the evening that smelled of wet pavement and possibility. The church basement was not a cathedral. It was a room with beige walls, folding tables, and a bulletin board where children's crayon drawings curled at the edges. It smelled of onions, softening in butter and coffee done right. A man tuned an old guitar. Someone laughed the way people laugh when their burdens are briefly lighter. No one looked her over to measure worth. No one asked for the list of her mistakes disguised as a testimony. Ruth waved her over. You came. I don't know what I'm doing here, the girl said, and then blushed. You're hungry, Ruth said, ladling soup. That's enough. They ate. They talked about nothing urgent, weather buses, a funny commercial with a dancing dog. Then the guitar man cleared his throat, and a handful of people stood. We're simple around here, he said. We sing what we remember. The first chords were imperfect. The voices weren't trained, but they were true. Waymaker, miracle worker. The girl held the styrofoam cup in both hands and felt heat spread outward into fingers, into arms, into a chest that had forgotten softness. Halfway through the second song, something in her broke open without breaking her. Tears rose, not the hot ones of rage, but the clean ones of release. She wiped them fast, embarrassed. Ruth pretended not to see the way kindness often does and slid a folded tissue across the table. After the songs, a man with a gentle jaw and a sweater that had seen many winters read from a small Bible. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He didn't pace or point. He just let the words be heavy enough to matter. Maybe you're tired of being strong, he said. Maybe you've been your own rescuer so long you forgot what rescue feels like. Jesus doesn't tell you to run faster. He says, come. The girl stared at a thumbtack on the bulletin board and listened as if the tack held the world in place. When he prayed, he did not demand eyes closed or hands raised. He said, if you want God to meet you tonight, just tell him. He's good at finding people. A dozen small prayers rose rustling leaves in a late wind. The girl whispered without sound, if you're real, I need rest. The room did not tilt. The ceiling did not open, but a weight lifted the width of a breath. On the bus home, she pressed her forehead to the cool glass and watched streetlights smear into gold lines. The city breathed. So did she. At her stop, she hesitated under the flickering neon cross. The little storefront sanctuary glowed like a lantern. She stepped inside just for a moment and stood in the doorway, where a handful of people knelt at a rail. A woman with gray braids sang a hymn older than anyone in the room. Amazing Grace. The girl's throat tightened on the second word. She left before anyone noticed and carried the hymn into the night like a coal under her coat. That night, the shadow at the corner of the room hovered and tested. It pressed without pinning. She woke once, gripped by the reflex to fear, then remembered a name, and breathed it once, Jesus, like a sigh. The dark shape shuddered and thinned. She slept until morning without the old suffocation, And when sunlight found her through the blinds, it landed on a face less guarded than the one that fell asleep. Small things changed first. She untied the crystal from his chain and slipped it into a drawer. She tossed the burned-down candles with their tired promises. She deleted the number of the aunt who dealt in smoke and secrets. She kept the book. She began to copy verses in a cheap notebook from the dollar aisle, her handwriting tightening when the words loosened her heart. On the bus, a teenage boy offered his seat. She said thank you and surprised herself by meaning it. The boy noticed. "What's with you?" he asked, suspicious of any glow that wasn't his own reflection. She rinsed a plate and answered, "I'm just trying something different," he snorted. "Don't get weird." She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't ask permission to exist. On Friday, she passed the bridge where the water had once looked like an exit. Police lights flashed at the far end. She stopped and prayed the smallest prayer, "Help them," and felt something like agreement rise around her. It was not drama, it was alignment. I multiplied her small obediences into open doors. The basement group became a habit. She learned the names that stitched a community: Mr. Al with the guitar, Miss Denise who made the cornbread, Eli who cracked jokes to hide how tender he was. One evening, the gentle-jawed man asked, "Would you like anyone to pray with you?" She nodded before caution could edit her. He didn't ask for the list. He said Jesus knows and laid a hand as light as a moth on her shoulder. Warmth ran down her spine like water after drought. She steadied herself on the back of a folding chair and laughed a small, surprised laugh she could not remember making since she was 9. That night, she slept without waking once. In the morning, she looked in the bathroom mirror and found the bruise on her wrist turning a soft yellow sooner than it should have. She pressed it and felt tenderness give way to something else space. She whispered, "Thank you," and the mirror did not argue. The enemy noticed the softening and hissed hurry before she slips away. He stirred petty arguments, sent old habits dressed in new excuses, and sharpened the boy's temper into a blade meant to nick then cut. But a boundary had begun to take root where helplessness had been. When the boy's voice rose, she said steady, "Not tonight," and stepped outside into a January air clear enough to sting. Frost cobwebbed the chain-link fence. The sky was a bowl of black velvet pricked with patient stars. She tucked her hands into her sleeves and let the cold tell the truth she was awake. You might call these moments small. I call them beginnings. Light does not always explode. Sometimes it seeps, finds seams, gathers, and then tips the room. She had not yet learned to fight with the weapons I give Scripture. On her tongue praise as a shield, the company of the saints as a shelter. But her face had turned. And when a face turns toward me, darkness loses its favorite angle. She walked back to the apartment with a hymn in her pocket and soup on her breath. The lock stuck twice the way it always did, then yielded. She slid the Gospel of John under her pillow and lay very still. In the space between waking and sleep, she heard me not in thunder, but in that still, unbreakable way, "I see you. I am not far. This is the way out. Keep coming." The enemy who had built a nest in a corner of her fear shifted uneasily. The journey from darkness to light had begun as a whisper. Soon it would sound like a storm turned to flight. Light unsettles darkness. When a heart that once bowed in silence begins to rise in song, the shadows scramble. And so the enemy, sensing her turning, tightened his grip. The days that followed were not gentle. They were war disguised as ordinary life. It began with dreams. Not the simple fragments of memory, but heavy visions that pressed on her chest. She saw figures without faces circling her bed. Their whispers slithered, "You're mine. You'll never escape." She woke drenched in sweat sheets, twisted tight, the echo of those words still ringing. By day, the boy noticed her changes, the softness in her voice, the notebook of verses she scribbled at the kitchen table, the way she slipped out on Wednesday nights. His suspicion festered. "What are you into now?" he demanded. She answered with quiet honesty, "I'm learning about Jesus." His laughter was sharp. "You don't make me laugh. You can't even fix your own life." He slammed the door and the echo followed her like a curse. I did not leave her in that moment. I never do. But she had not yet learned how to wield my name like a sword. So she cried in silence, thinking perhaps she had imagined my nearness. That week she tried to pray and felt nothing. The words stuck, the pages blurred. She sat at the bus stop with her tote heavy in her lap, whispering, "Where are you? Did I lose you already?" The enemy twisted her doubt into a dagger. "See, it was just a phase. He doesn't listen. You're still alone." But even in her silence, I was moving. At the soup night gathering, Ruth noticed the shadows under her eyes. "Rough week?" she asked. The girl nodded. Ruth leaned closer. "You should know when you turn toward him, the battle starts. The darkness doesn't let go easy, but it can't win." The girl swallowed hard. "Then why do I feel weaker than before?" Ruth smiled softly. "Because you're learning to lean on someone stronger." That night when the group began to sing, the girl couldn't bring herself to join. She sat still, head low, tears slipping hot down her cheeks. The song was about victory, but all she felt was defeat. Then Mr. Al, with his old guitar, stopped mid-strum. "Excuse me," he said, scanning the room. His eyes landed on her. "I don't usually do this, but I feel like God wants me to say he sees you. He knows the fight you're in, and he says you're not losing. You're learning." Her sob broke loose before she could stop it. Hands reached gently, not forcing, only resting nearby. No one mocked. No one scolded. They just prayed in murmurs, weaving her name into their petitions. She felt warmth spread again, thin but steady, like a candle refusing to die out. That night the battle came heavier. Sleep paralysis pinned her once more. Shadows pressed close, colder than ice. She could not move, could not speak, but in her mind she remembered Ruth's words. "It can't win." And from a place deeper than fear, she thought one word: Jesus. It came out as a muffled breath, but it was enough. The pressure cracked, the shadow shuddered, and with a soundless scream it vanished. She sat up, trembling, heart racing, whispering his name again and again, until dawn softened the window. The boy mocked her the next morning when she told him, "You're crazy, seeing things. Maybe all that church stuff is messing with your head." But inside, she knew something else: the darkness had retreated at his name. And that meant his name was power. The battle was not only spiritual, it was in her choices too. Old habits called. Friends invited her to parties with the promise of numbness. The bottle on the counter glinted like an old companion. She stared at it one Friday night, shaking torn. Her hand reached, then stopped. She whispered, "I want rest, not regret." With trembling fingers, she poured it down the sink. The enemy hissed in fury. I smiled. But battles are not won in a day. Anger still flared in her home. The boy's words cut deep. She still woke from dreams that rattled her bones. She still wondered if she was strong enough to keep walking. Yet each time I gave her glimpses of hope. A verse on a billboard. A hymn hummed by a stranger. A sunrise that painted her small apartment gold. Signs that whispered, "You are not forgotten." The turning point came on a night when the boy's rage rose higher than ever. He struck the table. A plate shattered. She flinched, fear burning through her veins. He towered, spitting venom. "You'll never leave. You're worthless without me." But something in her shifted. She straightened hands, still trembling, and said quietly, "That's not true. I'm not worthless. God says I'm his." The words stunned even her. They hung in the air like defiance wrapped in truth. The boy blinked, then stormed out, leaving the apartment echoing with slammed doors. She sank to her knees on the tile, weeping not from defeat but from release. I leaned close. "Yes, my daughter, you are mine, and no chain can hold you forever." From that night on, the enemy knew the battle was tilting. She had learned to speak my name. She had learned to call the lies what they were. And though darkness still circled, it trembled now, for light had entered the fight. Every war has a moment when the tide shifts. For her, that moment arrived not in thunder, but in a prayer whispered under flickering basement lights. It was another Wednesday night. The chairs creaked as people settled, the air fragrant with soup and bread. She came in, pale shoulders, slumped exhaustion stitched into her very breath. Ruth hugged her and whispered, "You look like you've been carrying the world." She almost laughed, if only Ruth knew how heavy it felt. As the songs began, she didn't sing. She stared at her lap, tracing circles on her jeans. Shadows still clung to her from the night before, visions of faceless figures, the hiss of lies in her ear. She had woken with the sheets damp from tears. And yet here she was, sitting in the circle of voices that lifted words too high for shadows to follow. Then it happened. In the middle of the hymn, the pastor paused. He looked around the room, his gaze landing gently on her. Tonight, he said slowly, someone here feels chained. You think the darkness has a claim on you, but God says no. You belong to Him. If that's you, don't be afraid. Come forward. Let's pray. Her heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden. But another voice, soft yet insistent, rose within. This is for you. Don't run. Her legs trembled as she stood. She walked forward each step, feeling heavier than stone. When she reached the front, her tears spilled freely. It's me, she whispered. I feel trapped. I can't sleep. I see things. I hear things. I can't get free. The pastor nodded gently. You've been in a fight, but the one who fights for you is greater. He laid a hand on her shoulder, not forceful, only steady. Others gathered, Ruth among them, their voices weaving prayers into the air. At first, nothing happened. She closed her eyes, expecting disappointment. But then, like a sudden wind rattling a window, the atmosphere shifted. Her chest tightened, her body shook. A deep cry tore from her throat, a sound not entirely her own. She doubled over, trembling, as if something inside her resisted leaving. Jesus, the pastor, prayed firmly. Every chain, every spirit of fear, every lie be broken now in your name. The room filled with murmured prayers, some weeping, some declaring truth. She gasped for air, feeling pressure rise like smoke from within, and then with a cry that split the silence, it lifted. She collapsed to her knees, breathless tears pouring down her face. But this time the tears were different, lighter, freer, like a storm that finally broke and cleared. She laughed through the sobs, clutching her chest. It's gone, she whispered. It's gone. I was there, closer than breath. I had watched her chains fall one by one until none remained. Darkness had no more hold. She was mine, and the enemy knew it. The group rejoiced quietly, not with spectacle, but with relief, like family witnessing a long-lost member step through the door. Ruth knelt beside her, pressing tissues into her hands. You're free, she said simply. Don't ever forget this night. When she stood again, the girl felt lighter, almost as if the room had grown larger. She hugged those who prayed for her, their warmth anchoring her trembling limbs. She walked home under a sky pierced with stars, every breath sharp with winter air. That night, for the first time in years, she lay down without fear. No shadow pressed at the corners. No weight pinned her chest. She whispered, Jesus, thank you, and drifted into a deep, unbroken sleep. The next morning, she woke before dawn. The apartment was silent, but something inside was alive. She opened the Bible, and the words seemed to breathe. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. She touched the verse with trembling fingers, whispering it again and again. The boy noticed changes quickly. When he snapped, she didn't cower. When he mocked, she didn't crumble. A quiet strength glowed in her eyes. He tried harder, pushing, testing, but his words no longer found the same target. She had been marked, and the darkness could not reclaim her. The enemy raged. He sent nightmares, stirred arguments, whispered doubts. But she now had a weapon. My name. Each time the shadows crept, she spoke it, sometimes trembling, sometimes firm, Jesus. And the darkness scattered. Soon her apartment bore new marks of life. Where once were crystals and candles, now lay open pages of scripture. Where once were silence and fear, now played soft worship songs from her phone. She even began to hum while folding laundry, a sound that startled her at first but soon became a habit. The breakthrough was not the end of battles, but it was the end of captivity. She had crossed a line from which she would not return. And I whispered, daughter, this is only the beginning. Watch what I will do. Morning light broke through the blinds, spilling across her small apartment. For the first time in years, she welcomed the day without dread. The silence no longer pressed like a weight. It was gentle, almost sacred. She sat at her table with the Bible open, steam curling from a chipped mug of coffee, and whispered, I'm free. I'm finally free. Her freedom did not erase every scar. The memories of abuse, the lies whispered in the night, the moments of despair still lingered like faint shadows. But now they no longer ruled her. She carried them as reminders, not chains, evidence of where she had been and proof of what I had done. Over the weeks that followed, she began to notice the subtle ways I worked in her. She laughed more easily. She caught herself singing softly while washing dishes. She found courage to say no when temptation called. And when the boy shouted, she no longer trembled. Sometimes she even whispered a prayer for him, asking me to reach his heart. One evening, Ruth called. I was thinking, would you share a little of your story at soup night? The girl froze. Her story felt too raw, too messy. I don't know if I can, she admitted. I don't even know what to say. Ruth chuckled gently. Just say what he's done for you. That's enough. So she did. On a quiet Wednesday, she stood in the same basement where she once sat in silence. Her hands trembled as she spoke, but her voice carried strength. She told of nights haunted by shadows of chains she thought unbreakable, of how one whispered name, Jesus, had split the darkness. The room leaned in, listening, not with pity, but with recognition. Many knew their own battles, their own shadows. And as she finished, the air was thick with hope. I watched with joy, for every testimony is not just a memory, it is a seed, and seeds bear fruit in ways unseen. From that night forward, she found herself speaking more, to neighbors, to co-workers, even to strangers on the bus. Not with sermons, but with stories, her story laced with my light. Some listened, some shrugged, but she spoke anyway, for she had discovered something deeper than survival. She had found purpose. Years later, she would look back and realize that the girl crying in the dark was gone. In her place stood a woman steady and hope-scarred, yet whole, quiet, yet strong. She would still face storms. Life does not spare anyone, but she now knew the anchor that held. And I, who had watched her tears in the dark, now delighted in her laughter in the light. To you listening now, perhaps you see yourself in her story. Maybe you too have cried alone in the night, feeling the shadows closing in. Maybe you've believed the lies that you are worthless, forgotten, too broken to be loved. But hear me, I see you. I know your pain. And just as I reach for her, I am reaching for you. The darkness will tremble at my light. The chains will fall at my name. And your story too can be rewritten, not by your strength, but by mine. If this story has stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Sit with it, reflect on it, share it with someone you trust. And if you've been walking far from me, know this, it is never too late to turn back. My arms are open and my light is waiting. And if you found hope in these words, consider sharing this story with someone who needs it. Sometimes the smallest seed planted can become the greatest miracle. This is not the end, it is the beginning. Step into the light.